Our next speaker is Srinivaas Kartikk. He's the head of partnerships, content, and community at X to 10X, a seasoned professional, a seasoned leader. And the question we have posed for him has been a twist, of the earlier question where people used to be asked, are founders made or born, are entrepreneurs born or made? And we kind of tweaked the question because we thought Karthik would be the right person to answer this, especially since the work that he's spearheading has actually resulted in fairly mundane, regular, run of the mill organizations sparking into multi baggers with the kind of infrastructure that they have created at X to 10X. So, without further ado, Karthik, over to you to help us answer the question whether multi baggers are born or they are made. So, over to you. And as they say, your 10 minutes starts now.
Thanks, Sachin. Thanks a lot for firstly inviting me to speak with this quorum. I think the my fellow panelists who've come before me have done such a fantastic job and set the bar so high. I can only hope that I live up to that bar. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karthik, and I'm here to talk about a rather entertaining yet controversial subject: are multi-bagger startups born or made? Now, bear in mind before we get into this subject that I will be using the terms multi-bagger startups, unicorns, successful startups slightly interchangeably. So don't hold me to the nomenclature, right? So for context, I basically am from Bombay, but I've been in Bangalore for the last 7 years now, and I've been part of the ecosystem. I was with Curefit from their early days for about 6 years. And so I do have around me an ecosystem of founders, investors, friends who basically participate within these ecosystems as well. And we've had endless debates about this, right? This is almost as entertaining a subject as Ronaldo versus Messi. I'm a football fan, and for me, it's very decided. I'm Team Ronaldo, but I'm not quite sure if I have a very strong POV either way, right? And I'll walk you through why that is the case, right? So for a startup to do exceedingly well in any category, right, there are a lot of things that have to fall in place just right. There are a lot of things that have to go that basically just have to fall in sync with other elements of a startup, right? This has and these can look like some of the points that I've listed out over here. A very solid team that happens to be supremely good at execution, right? The TAM is just optimal. You don't want for the TAM to be too small either. Otherwise, you're not necessarily going to be able to become a very big company. You have to have the resources, the know-how to basically navigate the problem statement that you're attempting to solve. And of course, all of these have to be there on the right problem, right? If you have all of the above, but you're basically working on a problem that doesn't quite need those kinds of elements, it's unlikely that the startup will do exceedingly well. I myself previously have attempted two startups in the past, one of which was an abject failure, and the other was, I think, moderately successful. So I do have a bit of an POV on each of these elements, and I'll walk you through the rest of the debate shortly. Right. So allow me to firstly make a case for both born versus made. Right. I think startups that inherently just hit. So when we say multi-bagger startups, right, I think if you were to basically just dive in a little bit more, what you're referring to essentially is product market fit, right? And for some startups like Facebook, Zomato back in the early days, back in 09, 010, right, they basically just hit PMF almost right off the bat, right? And this happened for or due to a bunch of reasons, right? Inherently, there were certain traits that the startup had that basically the market wanted at that time, right? In the case of Facebook, it was basically the need to connect with your peers on campuses. In the case of Zomato, it is the need to basically understand where you should go to eat, right? You want to learn about it before you actually step out, right? The next piece that I think is super critical is basically the founder's vision, right? When I was in the B school, right after the B school, and even for a few years in my professional career, right, I used to think this founder vision is basically a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It's one of those things that everyone likes to throw around. But actually, that's not quite the case. I've actually witnessed it firsthand that the founder's vision for where, let me break that founder's vision down a little bit more by calling out that the vision is nothing but an idea, or an idea for what the ideal state should be like for that category or for that problem statement, right? So the founder factor is super critical. And of course, market timing, right? I will elaborate a little bit more on market timing because it has a little bit more to do with whether startups are, or successful startups are born or made, more than we perhaps give credit to. The case for made is basically that these are startups that are effectively always on the hunt. They are scouting. They're very, very proactively trying to discover what works for the users that they're designing the solution for, and what doesn't, right? And another very, very critical element for startups that perhaps can be can be labeled as made a multi-bagger is the amount of support that they have, right? The amount of runway that they actually are able to amass for themselves. Uh, the Indian startup ecosystem, and largely globally as well, right? I think there are way too many stories of startups that, because of a lack of runway, were unable to actually pull off the vision that they had initially designed for their users, right? And then, of course, business acumen and strategy, right? What kind of decisions are you making along the way on this particular journey that effectively allow you to deliver the most optimal experience, the most optimal solution for that particular problem, right? There are obviously, again, several case studies here, Slack, Twitter, and Urban Company being my favorites. I would recommend that you check out this book called Hatching Twitter, a wonderful book about how Twitter was actually conceptualized, right? But when you basically lay out the when you build the case for born versus made and you pit them against each other, right? At the bottom of it all, through introspection, you will realize, as I did over the last several years, and after very entertaining, sometimes volatile conversations with friends in the ecosystem, that every successful startup at the core of it basically relies on a very fundamental core insight that makes that particular problem very relevant, and the solution very relevant as well, right? Startups that happen to be that we can perhaps label as born, uh, inherently have that insight baked into the startup right at inception, right? Largely perhaps down to founder vision. And startups that basically are made are startups that are effectively very, very thoughtfully, very proactively, with intent, figuring out the way to get to that core insight, right? They either discover it or they happen to stumble upon it, right? This is one piece that I think is super critical. This and market timing, I think, inherently will I think your POV effectively on market timing and core insights will help you decide which of the camps you happen to be in, whether startups are born, whether successful startups are born, or whether they are made. So, like I said at the very start of this conversation, right, that effectively what we are referring to when we say multi-baggers, we are referring to startups that have extremely strong PMF. And the thing with PMF is that it is a very, very, for some startups, obviously, it's super elusive. But for most startups, if you were to dive into their journeys, into their PNL as well, you will see that PMF happens to be a very ever evolving metric. What happens to be PMF for a startup when it's doing revenues of 10 crores is very different from the PMF it seems to have when it is at 100 crores. And again, the PMF evolves when the startup hits basically say 5,000 crores, right? And if I had to basically simplify it and come up with a recipe for a startup, right, that happens to do really well, it has to be a combination of the below, right? Like a very well-defined problem, and the definition of well-defined problem inherently includes that it is a very relevant problem, right? There are lots of problems that aren't quite relevant, but people have tried to make businesses out of it and have unfortunately, as expected, not done particularly well. So you need a well-defined problem. You need a very thoughtfully crafted solution. I think Kunal Shah is rather popular on Twitter, calling out that solutions have to be, orders of magnitude better than whatever is existing. I think Peter Thiel also said that at some point, and I have to agree with him. I have to agree with these super smart folks, right? You do require a solution that is extremely well tailored to the audience you're selling to. You do require great timing, and I will talk about that in just a minute, right? And it definitely helps if you happen to be a little lucky as well. And you have to be a little bit lucky primarily with timing, I think. uh, one of the things that I learned when I was at Kyofit happens to be several businesses rolled into one. And one such business that we had was MindFit, right? MindFit was basically a chain of studios that we'd set up in prime areas, prime high streets, right? With the intention of providing mental wellness offerings, right? The idea was really, really great, right? The TAM is super large, given that we're a young country, we're still evolving. Mental health is becoming a super big concern for us. You would have thought that MindFit would do really, really well, but MindFit absolutely struggled, right? We had, I think, upwards of 60 centers at our peak across four different cities. And the daily active user base, the retention, all of them were struggling on MindFit. Eventually, of course, we shut down MindFit as a unit. The lesson that I learned from this is that no matter how great the management is, it's very difficult to beat market conditions and timing. In the case of MindFit, as a country, back in 2017-18, we were a little too early to focus on mental wellness, right? Allow me to give you a couple more examples, right? Startups that had great large TAMs, the idea was great. Execution, however, wasn't very solid over there. One example is QB. Not sure if a lot of people have heard about it, but QB back in 2020 had raised over 1.5 billion, right? Billion with a B, right? And they wanted to create a platform that basically delivers short form video content. This and short form video content, of course, right now currently drives a large amount of DAU for large platforms like Meta, Instagram, even YouTube Shorts, right? But QB failed terribly, right? It was poor execution on a very, very large TAM, very well equipped team too, right? Then we have examples like DuckDuckGo, which happens to be a competitor of Google, right? They had great execution, but they're operating in a really small TAM. They have, by the way, the DAU, the daily active user count of DuckDuckGo stands at 30 million users, right? But their market share is only 0.65%. It is ridiculous, right? Of course, this puts in context how big the TAM is for the vertical DuckDuckGo operates in. But this is to give you an idea that you have to have several different elements fall into place together at the right time, right, for you to have what we can define as or label as a multi-bagger startup.
I'm big sorry to do this, but last 1 minute.
Absolutely, I'm done, Sachin. Basically, at the foundation of it all, what I want to leave you with is that regardless of whether you're a startup that's achieved success because you're born or you're made, at the foundation, at the core of it all, is that you have a very, very strong PMF, right? And what I have with you for you on the slide is basically just a small breakdown of how to actually get to that PMF. Right. So I'm going to end this a little 30 seconds early, right? Just like my fellow peers have. Thanks, Sachin.
Thank you so much, Karthik. As expected, uh, everything that you covered comes from rich case studies and from your own experience of dealing with so many startups, and of course the confidence of being part of the organization that has time and time again produced multi-maggers. So we will perhaps reduce the agony of Ronaldo versus Messi by saying that if you are working with a bunch of really solid mentors, entities who are experienced, entities who know how to sort of help the founders with the chops, multi-baggers can most certainly be made and they need not be born. But thanks a ton for sharing this perspective, Karthik. Sincere thanks. And we